gravel crunched under her tires as she pulled into her own driveway, except it didn't feel like hers anymore. A crowd had already gathered near the barn, folding chairs set up in neat rows, an auctioneer testing his microphone 20 feet from her front porch. She wasn't attending this auction. She was the reason for it. Yes, this really happened. She really did reach into an old metal toolbox sitting on her passenger seat. And what she pulled out really did stop the auction cold, for a reason nobody standing in that driveway saw coming. Comment below and tell me where you're watching this from. Linda Torres had run the family dairy farm in western Wisconsin for 6 years, alongside her husband, Mark, before a heart attack took him suddenly on a Tuesday morning while he was out checking fences. 49 acres, 32 dairy cows, and a mortgage they'd taken out together to expand the milking parlor 2 years earlier. All of it had been theirs, built together, until Linda found herself managing it alone. Grief made the first few months a blur. Bills piled up faster than she could process them, and by the time she pulled herself together enough to sit down with the farm's finances, she was already 3 payments behind on the mortgage. She called the bank, explained her husband's death, and asked about hardship options. The representative was polite but unhelpful, informing her the loan remained in default regardless of the circumstances, and foreclosure proceedings would begin if the balance wasn't brought current within 60 days. 60 days wasn't enough time to sell enough cattle, or find a way to catch up, not while also running the entire operation by herself. The foreclosure notice arrived in March. The auction date was set for late May. In the weeks between, Linda spent evenings going through Mark's things, a task she'd been avoiding since the funeral. His workshop in the barn still smelled like motor oil and cut lumber. Tools hung exactly where he'd left them, tucked in the bottom drawer of his old metal toolbox. Beneath a layer of wrenches and spare bolts, she found a folder of papers she didn't recognize, insurance documents from when they'd first taken out the expansion loan. Reading through them at the kitchen table that night, one page caught her attention. Buried in the paperwork was a mortgage protection insurance policy. One Mark had apparently added when they signed the original loan, a policy specifically designed to pay off the remaining mortgage balance in full in the event of the borrower's death. Linda didn't remember signing up for anything like this, but there was Mark's signature, dated the same day as their original loan closing. She sat with that folder for a long time, unsure whether it meant anything at all or whether it had simply lapsed, been canceled, or never actually been processed by the bank in the first place. But it was the only thing she had that even suggested this foreclosure might not be entirely valid. On the morning of the auction, with nothing left to lose, she slid the folder into Mark's old toolbox and loaded it into her truck. Pulling into her own driveway that morning felt surreal, watching strangers set up folding chairs on the same grass where her kids used to play. Linda parked near the barn and walked toward the small group of bank representatives standing near the auctioneer's podium, the toolbox heavy in her hand. She tried explaining the insurance documents to the first person she found, a county auction coordinator who barely glanced at the folder before telling her this wasn't the right time or place to dispute loan paperwork. That matter needed to go through the bank's legal department, not an auction coordinator standing in a driveway 20 minutes before bidding started. Before we get to what happened once the bidding actually began, hit subscribe, because what Linda pulled from that toolbox next stopped an entire foreclosure auction in front of a stunned crowd. Desperate, Linda called the emergency contact number on her mortgage statement, standing off to the side while the crowd continued filling in around her. She got a hold music loop and an automated message estimating a 45-minute wait time. The auctioneer, unaware of any of this, began his opening remarks, welcoming bidders and describing the property's acreage, cattle count, and remaining equipment included in the sale. Linda's hands were shaking as she watched the first bidder cards go up. Her farm, her home, the barn Mark had built with his own hands, all of it being priced out loud in front of a crowd of strangers while she stood 20 feet away, holding a folder that might mean nothing at all. The bidding climbed quickly through the opening numbers, dealers and investors calling out increments with the casual efficiency of people who did this regularly. Linda's phone was still on hold. The auctioneer's voice picked up pace, moving toward what sounded like a final round of bidding on the property itself. She had, by her own later estimate, maybe 2 or 3 minutes before the gavel would come down and there would be nothing left to dispute at all. Making a decision she later described as pure instinct, Linda walked directly toward the auctioneer's podium, toolbox in hand, and asked him to stop the auction immediately. The crowd went quiet, uncertain whether to be annoyed or curious. The auctioneer, clearly not used to interruptions mid-bid, asked her, not unkindly, what exactly she thought she had that could possibly matter at this point. Linda opened the toolbox and pulled out the folder, handing the folder directly to the bank representative standing nearest the podium. Linda pointed to the specific page, the mortgage protection insurance policy bearing Mark's signature, dated the same day as their original loan closing 6 years earlier. She explained, as clearly as she could manage with her voice shaking, that this policy was supposed to pay off the mortgage balance entirely in the event of the borrower's death, and that as far as she could tell, nobody had ever actually filed a claim against it. The bank representative's expression shifted almost immediately. He asked to see the policy number, then pulled out his phone and stepped away from the podium, speaking quietly to someone on the other end of the call. The auctioneer, sensing something had genuinely changed, paused the bidding and asked the crowd to hold for a moment. Minutes passed. The crowd murmured, some people checking their watches, others watching Linda with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. When the bank representative returned, his tone had changed completely. He confirmed that a mortgage protection policy matching that number did exist in their system, originated the same day as the loan, but internal records showed no claim had ever been filed against it following Mark's death, meaning the policy may have remained active and unused this entire time. That single detail changed everything happening in that driveway. If the policy was still valid and a claim had simply never been processed, the foreclosure itself may have been entirely unnecessary. The mortgage could have been paid off in full nearly 6 years' worth of payments ago, the moment Mark died. If anyone at the bank had connected his death to that policy sitting quietly in their own records, the representative apologized, visibly uncomfortable, and explained that mortgage protection claims typically required the borrower's family to actively file paperwork, something Linda, grieving and unaware such a policy even existed, had never known to do, and something the bank's own systems apparently hadn't flagged automatically, despite having record of both the policy and the death. Turning to the auctioneer, the representative gave an order that silenced the remaining chatter in the crowd completely. Halt the auction, effective immediately, pending a full review of the policy claim. The gavel that had been inches from coming down on Linda's farm never fell. Bidders who'd been calling out numbers moments earlier began quietly folding their chairs, several offering Linda sympathetic nods on their way back to their trucks. Linda stood there holding the empty folder, momentarily unable to process that the toolbox she'd almost left at home that morning had just stopped her entire foreclosure in its tracks. The formal claims review took just under 3 weeks, during which the bank confirmed the mortgage protection policy had indeed remained active and untouched since the day it was originated, exactly as the paperwork in Mark's toolbox indicated. Once processed, the policy paid off the entire remaining mortgage balance in full, not a reduction, not a settlement, but a complete payoff that left Linda owning her farm outright for the first time since she and Mark had taken out the expansion loan years earlier. Beyond clearing the mortgage, the bank issued a formal apology, acknowledging that better internal processes should have flagged the policy automatically following notification of Mark's death, rather than relying on a grieving widow to somehow know a policy existed and file a claim herself during the hardest months of her life. Local news picked up the story within days of the auction's public cancellation, drawn to the almost cinematic timing of Linda producing the folder minutes before the gavel would have fallen. Calls started coming in from other widowed farmers and their families across the region, several wondering aloud whether they too might have similar protection policies buried somewhere in old loan paperwork nobody had thought to check. Financial advisors interviewed for follow-up coverage noted that mortgage protection insurance was more common than most borrowers realized, often bundled quietly into loan agreements and then forgotten entirely unless something prompted someone to go looking. For Linda, the farm's future looked entirely different than it had just weeks earlier. No mortgage payment, no looming deadline, just 32 dairy cows and 49 acres that were now completely hers to run without the weight of that debt hanging over every decision. She kept Mark's toolbox exactly where it had always been, in the barn workshop, though she moved the insurance folder to a fireproof safe in the house, unwilling to risk losing something that important ever again. What people who followed her story tend to remember isn't just the timing, dramatic as it was. It's the reminder that grief can bury important details in ways nobody fully accounts for. That somewhere in old paperwork, filed away, and forgotten during the worst months of someone's life, there can be answers nobody thought to look for until it was almost too late. Linda's farm still sits along that same stretch of Wisconsin road today. Cows grazing in the same pastures Mark once walked every morning. The mortgage he unknowingly protected, finally serving the exact purpose he'd signed up for all those years ago. A forgotten insurance policy, tucked inside an old toolbox, stopped her foreclosure minutes before the gavel fell and cleared her mortgage completely. Mark's quiet decision years earlier ended up saving everything. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real stories where the smallest overlooked detail changed everything.